Hi everybody, it's Janet with Fruit of the Vine Art Studio, and tonight is our last vacation Bible school adventure of this season for this year. I am so appreciative of you joining me and having joined me for the last 3 weeks for the other episodes that we've already done. Just as a quick reminder, here, let me get over here so I can see that real quick. When you pop on, I'd love it if you'd just give me a comment, let me know that you're here. I really appreciate knowing, seeing the comments, and that way, at least I know that I'm actually on and things are working right. Look at my wild looking hair tonight, huh? Anyway, here's the 3 that we've talked about already this year. This is season 2, episode 1. We talked about Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, 3 faithful men. Here we see them with King Nebuchadnezzar, who is completely surprised that they have made it through the fire and that God's angel is there to protect them. The next episode was episode 2, and we told the story of Ruth and Naomi. In this sweet story, we learned about Naomi coming back with her mother-in-law after the death of her husband, and she felt a family obligation to help her mother-in-law, so she went out and she gleaned in the fields and took the grain back for them to eat. Her beauty and kindness was recognized by Boaz, who eventually married her, and then they ended up having a son, a very special son that ended up in the family of Jesus. Now, the next episode was Samson and Delilah. Here we see Samson, who has been taken and chained in between the pillars of the temple, and he used his strength that one last time to get his revenge on the Philistines and to win back Israel for them. So here we have Samson from Samson and Delilah. Now tonight is the last episode, and as we've noticed, each one of the stories, they kind of started out short and got longer and longer. This is going to be quite a long episode, actually, and I hope that you can stick with me. You might want to put on your pajamas. It's a long one. Get your paints out, get your pencils out, your markers, whatever it is that you're going to be using tonight. Here, let me see. Now, if you had seen the first template that I put out, there's a difference between the two. Here's the last one that we have here. This is the one that I'm going to be painting tonight. You can see Queen Esther preparing the banquet. So that is what we're looking at, and that's what we're going to paint. So I'm going to flip this down. I did just put the template up for those of you that are joining me. If you haven't had a chance to print that out, it's going to be right on the post before this one. It should be on the page. Just go ahead, print it out, grab your pencils, your crayons, your markers, whatever. Join me for a night of a great story while we do a little bit of painting along together. I really appreciate the fact that you're here with me. Here we go. I'm going to tilt you down so that you can see this right here. And I'm going to try to make sure that I've got everything right in the angle here. There's an awful lot of darkness in the front of it. Let me move this stuff. There. That helps. Get all those paint bottles out of the way. Okay, so tonight we're going to be using quite a few different colors. Let's see, I've got her right here. Let's see if I tilt that light on it better. It just seems awfully dark in here tonight. I don't know why. Is it that one? Okay, let's get on with painting, and we'll get on with our story too. Let me move that out of the way. You guys know I have to have this story printed out. This is a long story. But it's really, really great. It's a great, interesting story. There's a lot to it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get out some water and put that in my cup. And I am going to paint. I'm going to paint the background here. I'm going to make this part of this right here a golden color. And this will be a light brown, and this is also going to be a brownish color down here for the floor. So we'll start out with our golden color. I'm just going to use an King's Gold. Get that out. I'm not going to need too awfully much of that. And I'm going to just take my these things out of the way so I can see my brushes. Get my little brushes out here so I'm all ready. Okay. I'm going to take my round brush and I'm just going to dip it in the water, and I'm going to get a little bit of the gold paint here and thin it down just slightly, not very much, just slightly. And I'm going to paint this gold adornment right here along the wall in the background, okay? And while I'm doing that, I'm going to start the story. Now, long ago, in a country called Persia, which was Babylon, there was a king, and the king had a very odd name. His name was Ahasuerus, and he had a wife, a queen, and the queen's name was Vashti. King Ahasuerus ordered the queen to appear before him at a party so that everyone would see how pretty she was. The only problem was that the queen Vashti refused. And this made the king furious. Now, to make matters worse, there was a mean-spirited, evil man whose name was Haman, and he happened to be one of the king's chief helpers. And Haman teased the king about Vashti's refusal to appear. And he told him that if word got around, all the women in the kingdom would begin to think that they didn't need to listen to their husbands, that they didn't need to obey their husbands, and that pretty soon there'd be just complete chaos within the land. So, at Haman's urging, King Ahasuerus decided to get rid of Queen Vashti, even if she was the granddaughter of the old King Nebuchadnezzar. He didn't care. The king decided that he needed a new queen. I'm just going to bring this right across right here. So, because the queen refused to appear before the king and all of his people and show them how pretty she was, Haman teased the king, and the king decided that he needed a new queen. He was going to get rid of her. King Ahasuerus announced, "Bring me the most beautiful women from all over my kingdom." And it wasn't very long at all before the king's scouts happened upon Esther. She was so beautiful and gracious and kind. She was exactly what the king was looking for. Esther was a beautiful young girl who had lost her parents. She was also Jewish, which meant that she was an Israelite. She lived in the land of Persia with her older cousin, Mordecai. The Jews had been driven out of their home in Israel about 70 years beforehand, and they were exiled in Persia at this time. We're going to give her some golden-looking sandals. Now, they lived a very different life there in Persia than they had back in Israel, and they prayed and hoped that someday they would be able to return back to their home. But for the time being, they were in Persia. Now, Esther's older cousin, Mordecai, he was the leader of the Jews. Mordecai encouraged Esther to enter the king's beauty contest. "Oh, please don't make me go," begged Esther. "But you must. Every girl in the kingdom has to enter the contest by the order of the king," her cousin Mordecai replied. Esther crossed her arms and said, "I'm happy right where I am. I definitely don't want to be a queen. Besides, I'm Jewish, and the king isn't, and there's thousands of Persian girls who are going to enter this contest. They don't even need me. Now I'm going to take just the tiniest touch of this nutmeg brown and mix it in with the gold right here to get a slightly darker color. About like that. And I'm going to use that to do the inside of this doorway. Using that same round brush. Okay, so now we've got to the point where Mordecai is trying to talk Esther into joining the beauty and telling her and explaining to her that she needs to join the beauty contest. She can't just say no. The scouts have already seen her. She has to go. She said, but they don't need me. Well, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to enter. The scouts have already seen you, and it is order of the king. But don't worry. There are so many girls entering, you probably won't be chosen anyway. Mordecai assured her. But Esther, I do want you to promise me one thing. Yes, Esther said. You must not let anyone know that you are Jewish. Do you understand? She nodded sadly. I'm making this just a little darker here for shading right on the inside of that, right underneath here. Esther nodded sadly. She understood him. I'm going to bring it right around here. And just a little bit across the bottom. There we go. So now that wine vessel that she's holding has got some different color to it, and then we're going to just touch the dark brown and fill it in right there in the middle, because we don't see the wine down in there. It's down in there, though. She's got some wine that she's bringing to the table. So there we go. Now we've got our wine vessel done, and we're going to paint this little bowl down here with this same darker brownish color. And let's darken that up on the inside just a little bit too with this darker brown color, just a little, inside the bowl right here and inside the bowl right there. So now we've got the bowl done, and I'm going to rinse this off of here. Okay, so he said you must promise me one thing, and he said you mustn't let anybody know that you're Jewish. Do you understand? And she nodded sadly, and she said, yes, I understand. But I hope the king doesn't choose me. I pray that God would make the king choose someone else. Esther, Mordecai scolded, you mustn't pray for only what you want, but for what God wants of you. Esther was confused. What I mean, Mordecai said, is that God may not always give us what we want, but he does provide us with everything we need. You can't just ask for what you want all the time, because it might not be what God wants. So you're supposed to ask for what God wants. Okay, so now I'm going to take this brown here, and I'm going to fill in this back here for the walls. With this nutmeg brown. I might add a little bit of water to that. I'm not sure yet. I'll see how that looks as we're going along here, because it looks a little goopy. I might need to get the other brown. Is that this one? Well, we'll see. We'll see. Okay, so he told her that she needed to pray for what God wants and not what she wants. And she says, well, how would I know what God wants? How do I pray for something that I don't even know what it is? And he said, well, you would just simply pray, God, whatever you want, I want. I trust in you. Do you understand? I think so, Esther said. Instead of saying, God, don't let the king pick me for a queen, I really should be praying God, if you want me to be queen, then I'd be happy to do so, and please help me to be the best that I could be? Asked Esther. Yes, that's right. That's exactly it, said Mordecai. And if God chooses you, let me get that wet just a little bit, and if God chooses you to be the queen, I do not want to hear that you are up there pouting and being unhappy. I know what a lovely person you are, and I want you to stay just that way, happy and cheerful, Mordecai proclaimed. So Esther packed her bags. I'm going to fill this in right around her hair. Get this right in here. I got to get this little area right in front of her face. And around her crown. She's got a gold gold crown right there with a jewel on the front of it. Gonna bring that right across through here. There we go. That looks a little better. Just getting a little bit dried right there where I left that sit for just a second. So what I do is I just dip my brush into the water, roll off a little of it, and then wet this up a little bit, get a little more paint, put it right on top of it, and that makes it back to being able to be manipulated again much easier. That's a good thing about acrylics. They're just water-based paints, and you can just add a little bit of water to it, and it'll loosen it up just a little bit, and then you can just smooth it and make it look, it'll still have a little bit of a look to it where you can see where it dried some, but it's not going to look quite as bad. You can always smooth it down a little bit. And then you can always let it dry and add a little bit more too. Okay, so now we're getting that part done right there. Okay. Now Esther packed her bags and she made ready for the trip in the morning. Esther knew that she's going to have to spend a whole year at the palace away from her family and her friends. Before the king would even be choosing a new bride, it was going to be a whole year. But Esther was happy, though, because she knew that at least she would see Mordecai. Mordecai, her cousin, actually worked there. He was a minor official. So she knew that at least some of her family she was going to see. She was going to see Mordecai on a pretty regular basis, almost daily while she was there for that whole long year, waiting for the king to choose a new queen. Flip my page. Now this year passed by pretty quickly. I'm going to turn this way real fast. The year passed by pretty quickly, but Esther missed her home very much. She missed her home greatly. But Esther did her best to keep the promises that she had made to Mordecai. She remained cheerful and she remained kind. I'm going to drag this around the edge right here. Get a little more of the brown. That brown's just a little thick. I think it's been setting just a little too long. Okay. And every night she prayed that God would help her to do his will. Esther didn't like the way that the other girls that were there, how they would tease each other and how they were mean-spirited towards one another. She tried to be kind to everyone that she met. Everyone. Didn't matter. She was placed in the care of a man whose name was Haggai. Now, because she was so kind and cheerful and gracious, her and Haggai even eventually became friends. And Haggai eventually, he put Esther and her servants in the best room in the palace, and he would bring her little small gifts. He liked her very much. She was a sweet young girl. Okay, that's kind of just trying to smooth that out a little bit. And then I'm just going to take my brown and just kind of bring it around the edges here. Just a little bit of highlighting to it is all that is. I'm just making it just as a little highlight around on that golden outside. There we go. So now we've got the castle wall, the palace wall painted this brownish color back here. Now I'm going to have to come up with something for the floor. I don't want it to be that dark. Okay, but well, for now we're going to go on with this. Let me rinse this off, and we're going to get us out some purple. That's navy. Everything's squirting over here. I'm using the tippy ends of every bottle, it seems, every time I'm doing these things. Okay. So anyway, Haggai had put Esther and her servants in the best room at the palace, and he was bringing her small gifts. And the 12 months had passed, and now the time had come for Esther to go and meet the king. And Haggai said, Esther, do not be afraid of the king. As they neared the throne room, and Haggai led the beautiful girl to the king, and she knelt before him. Now I'm going to take my purple, and I'm just going to do these little grapes here. I'm just going to touch them with the purple, and actually I'm going to get a little bit of white also. To go with that, and I'll touch a little bit of white and a little bit of purple, just to kind of give them a mottled color. Some of them will be darker, some of them will be lighter, and I'm just touching them on here. Mixing it as it goes, little dots, little spots. Just making little grapes in her bowl. Get me another dot of each, a little touch of the white. There we go. Now, let me pull it up a little closer for you. You can see your little grapes that way, and that's just kind of touching it with the purple and the white together. Just kind of letting it blend itself as it goes right there on the canvas itself. Okay, so now the 12 months had passed, and Haggai had led the beautiful girl in before the king, and she knelt before the king. And as she was kneeling before the king, she prayed silently, "Give me the strength to do your will." And at that moment, as she finished her prayer, she raised up her head without even thinking. Now, this was something that you just didn't do without the king's permission. But it was her habit every time when she prayed that she would look up when she ended, lift her face towards the heavens as she finished her prayer. And as she looked up, when she did that, the look on her face was so serene. She was so beautiful that the king's heart was instantly hers. He gazed down at her. My goodness, he thought. This one is very young, but she's so beautiful. I just don't know. And then, after he thought about it, he finally broke into a wide smile. He was happy that he had finally found his bride after this year-long search. "What is your name?" he asked. Oh, immediately Esther realized her mistake. She bowed her head and she looked back down at the floor. "Esther, my lord," she said. "Esther, it's all right. You can look up," said the king. And when she did, she blushed. And this pleased the king too. And he said, "You have beauty beyond compare. Not only are you beautiful in the flesh, but also of the heart," he exclaimed. And he called for his attendants to bring him the crown of Queen Vashti. And he placed it gently on Esther's head, and he said, "Esther, you are now my queen." I'm just filling her robe in with this pretty purple color here. And I'm going to do it right in between right here, but I'm going to leave these two areas and make that a different color. Just going to try to slide that right up in the middle of it, right there. Just along like that. There we go. Now, meanwhile, while all this was going on with her and the king in there, him giving her the crown and making her his queen, meanwhile, Mordecai was working outside the palace gates. And he was just sitting out there watching people run around, doing all kinds of various activities, and he was leaning against the wall. And he was thinking about how much he missed Esther. It had been a long time. She had been gone. I mean, he did get to see her just about every day, but it wasn't like it used to be. She wasn't back at home with him and the rest of the family. It was just so different without Esther being home. She brought so much joy to their home. He missed her beyond compare. But he was happy that he was able to see her almost every day. But he was sad also because he knew that she had to hide the fact that she was a Jew from the king. And that was really, really very dangerous for her. I'm going to put this right in between here. Right here. And over on this arm. And this is her hair coming down right here. She's got long black hair. I'm going to make her hair black. She combs back her long dark hair in this story. She's got long dark hair. So we're going to give that to her. Okay, so now Mordecai is outside, sitting outside the palace gates. And he was worried about her because she had to hide the fact that she was a king, or she was a Jew from the king. And then suddenly, all of a sudden, he heard these low voices nearby. And it startled Mordecai. Now, not too long. No, that's too long to wait, he heard. Too many people's going to be there, said a voice. It's best that we do this while he sleeps. Well, perhaps we could bribe one of the servants, said another voice. Mordecai peeked around the corner of the wall, and he saw two men standing there, and his eyes widened when he realized who the two men were. Bigthan and Teresh. Both of them worked for the king. He scooched closer to the wall for fear of being seen, and he continued to listen as they plotted to kill the king in his sleep the following night. And as soon as they left, he rushed to tell Esther the queen. I'm going to get a little bit of red out here. Ooh, maybe. There we go. And give my brush a quick rinse. Now, he rushed in, and he rushed to Esther, and he told her what he had heard Bigthan and Teresh say outside the wall. "Oh, Mordecai," she said, "you must have misunderstood. They're the king's men. Why in the world would they want to kill the king?" Esther stated. "I know it sounds crazy," Mordecai said. "That is what I heard. You must warn the king." Esther worried. But what if I'm wrong? The king is going to think that I'm just a crazy child with a wild imagination. But what if it's true? Wouldn't you risk looking like a fool to save the king's life? Said Mordecai. And when Mordecai left, Esther hurried to the palace courts. She reached the king's throne room and she adjusted her crown and she smoothed down her skirts. She walked in quickly and she made her way to the king, and she bowed down before him, and the king took her hand, and he said, "Well, what is it, my queen?" "Teresh and Bigthan are plotting to kill you, my lord." The king frowned. "How do you know this, Esther?" My cousin Mordecai. He heard them. They planned to bribe one of your servants and kill you tomorrow night while you sleep." "Are you positive of this?" asked the king as he leaned forward. Got just a smidgen out of line, but that's okay. I'm not even going to worry about it. I'm just going to keep filling it in. Just doing this red. Right there on that little spot on this. Right up through here. I might even do the belt in red. Why not? "Are you positive of this?" said the king. "Yes, your majesty," Esther replied sadly. "Thank you, Esther. You have saved my life," he said with a big smile. Esther smiled back and said, "You're welcome. But it's really because of my cousin Mordecai. Had he not told me, I would not have known." Mordecai had returned to his place along the palace walls. Just then a loud trumpet was blown, and he looked down the road off in the distance to see several men carrying another man in a tall chair. He recognized that man. It was Haman. When Haman passed by him, Mordecai sat quietly on the ground, and he didn't even look up. Haman, this time, by now, he had become a really powerful man in the kingdom. In fact, the king had promoted him to Prime Minister of Persia. And with this rise in power, Haman had thought that it was appropriate for everyone to bow down to him. But Mordecai refused to bow down to Haman. He would only bow down to God. Now, this infuriated Haman. He hated Mordecai and all the Jewish people, actually. They were God's people, and they just refused to obey Persian law. Didn't Mordecai know how important Haman was? Haman thought to himself, "I'll get rid of him then. Better yet, he's a Jew. I'll get rid of every one of them." He wiggled. He chuckled with a wicked grin on his face. He chuckled with a wicked grin on his face. He was an evil, evil man. Haman had become so angry and so hateful that he decided to ask the king to authorize a royal decree to rid the world of the Jews, to annihilate completely every one of them. He wasted no time making a long list of lies and accusations against the Jews. Part of the list was true, but most of the list was a lie. He marched into the throne room with a flourish, and he said, "Your Majesty," in his most important voice, "it has come to my attention that there is a group of people in this land that do not respect you or your laws. Not only is this causing a problem for our people, They are becoming restless. These people are setting a bad example for the others, and this must be dealt with before they begin plotting against you and cause problems all across the kingdom. Who are these people? The king demanded. Haman bowed even lower and said, My lord, they are the Jews. Hi, Jessica. I just happened to look up. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate that. Hope you're enjoying the story. Okay, so now that had happened, and he said, They are the Jews to the king. And the king said, But they have a very powerful God, the king timidly said. They are a devoted group of people. No, they have long deserted their God, replied Haman. We're going to do the chairs in this pretty red too. They have long deserted their God, said Haman. They are all alike. One is no better than the other. But wouldn't eliminating them cause our kingdom to suffer? Asked the king. They're scattered all over the kingdom. Who would even notice? Said Haman. They keep to themselves, apart from everyone. They think they're better than us. They eat and they drink alone. They don't allow their daughters to marry us or even mingle with the rest of us. They do nothing but come up with more holidays to avoid work. And they think they're so much better that eventually they're going to plot to overthrow you and take over. Now the king was concerned and very angry at the thought that another plot was being made against him. Were the Jews responsible for Bigtham and Teresh turning against the king? He wondered. Haman knew that he had the king where he wanted him, and he quickly added, Your Majesty, I have a plan. King Haman had got King Ahasuerus to agree to allow him to create the new laws. Do with them what you will, said the king to Haman. Now God's people were in great danger. I'm going to fill in this chair right here. And it's going to be right in the middle of the back right here. So, when the king gave Haman the go-ahead to create his own laws and gave him a ring that he could use to stamp the king's approval to the new laws, Haman just quickly scurried out of the room. Ha ha! I've got Mordecai now, he chuckled with glee. He'll wish he had bowed down. Oh, he'll wish he had done it. In fact, he's going to wish he had bowed down and kissed my feet. So Haman then cast lots to determine what day he was going to get rid of all the Jews. Now wait a second. He casted lots? What exactly does that mean? Well, actually it's sort of like rolling the dice or flipping a coin or drawing straws, you know, when somebody gets the short straw. Something like that. It's meant that it was a random date, that it wasn't a chosen date. They like put all the dates and all the months in a basket or something like that, and they shook it up and they drew one name or one date out of there. And that date was decreed. That date was in Adar, which was the last month of the coming year, and it was going to be on the 13th day of that month that all the Jews were to be killed in every province and every nation of the land. There would be no escape. The end of the Jews was very, very near. Now this is where our brave Queen Esther comes in the picture. Here she was a Jew, and her husband, the king, had unknowingly allowed a decree that would end her life. That night, Mordecai had a dream, and in the dream the prophet Elijah appeared, and he told Mordecai about the impending danger. He told Mordecai of Haman's wicked plan, and it was all revealed to Mordecai in his dream. And when Mordecai awoke, he was so upset that he ripped his clothes and put on a sackcloth, and he went out into the city wailing and crying so loudly and alerting the others to their upcoming doom. And every place to which the story of the king's decree traveled, there was wailing and mourning and crying among the Jews. There was weeping and wailing, and many were fasting. Soon, Queen Esther heard the mourning and crying outside of the palace, and she sent 2 of her servants to find out what was wrong. Now, I'm going to put a little bit of red in here, and if you happen to have the other template, the first one, that one was a turkey. And we got to thinking about it and checked it out, and I don't believe that they actually had turkey. Back in the day, I was just trying to make something for her banquet. So instead, we know that they had lamb and goat. And so that's going to have a little bit of a reddish color to it, and then we're going to brown it up with a little bit too, so that it doesn't look like it's just a plate of bloody meat, because that's not the intention. We're going to rinse this off and then go into the brown over here. Since it's awfully thick, and thin that out a little bit. Okay. So there was weeping and there was wailing, and the queen heard it outside, and she told 2 of her servants to go out and to find out what was wrong. And when the servants came back, they told her that they had a message from Mordecai. And the message was, Queen Esther, Mordecai says that the king signed a decree that says every Jew must die on the 13th day of the 12th month. He wants you to please go to the king, change his mind and that law. They told her, you must save yourself and the rest of God's people. I'm just going to kind of go over the red with the brown a little bit, just to give it a little bit of a different look there. You can still see the red through the brown. Kind of give it that meat type look to it, a little bit of a meatish look. So now that's what they had come to tell her, that Mordecai said that about the decree that had been signed, and that all the Jews were going to be killed on the 13th day of the 12th month, and that she must do something. She must save herself. She's got to go talk to the king and get him to change his mind. Esther was afraid. At this point, she hadn't even seen the king. I'm dipping into just a bitty bit of the white, and I'm just going to kind of just pull it along the edge here to give the impression of maybe just a tiniest bit, a little bit of fat on the meat. I don't know, maybe just a little. And if yours has got the turkey, just go ahead and paint your turkey a nice goldish color like you did the pot here. And then put just the tiniest bit of brown on top of it, and it'll look perfect too, and don't even worry about it. It's fine. It's just a painting, and we're just telling the story and painting together. It doesn't matter if you've got this one or that one. Any one will do. Okay, so now we've got that meat painted. I'm going to rinse that off. And now I'm going to get a little bit of gold out, and I'm going to get my shiny bright gold, this pretty shiny bright gold. going to paint Queen Esther's crown with the gold. I'm going to turn her around this way and paint this crown. Okay, now Esther was afraid. She said, I haven't been allowed to see the king for a month. In fact, there's a law. No one can see the king without being invited. It's been 30 days since I've seen him. If I go to the throne room without being asked, it will be me who is put to death. The servants told Mordecai what Esther had said, and he replied to them, You tell her it is clear that she was chosen as queen so that she might be of service to her people. The time has come to not think of just herself. For if she stays quiet at this time, there will be no one to deliver the Jews from another place. Her own family's home will be destroyed. Esther had been made queen for such a time as this. Now that night, after hearing Mordecai's reply, Esther slept restlessly. Suddenly, she awoke from her sleep with a start. Perhaps, God really did want me to become queen for this very reason, to stop the Jews from being put to death. Maybe I was made queen for such a time as this. So, Esther came up with her own plan, even though she knew that it would be a very risky one for her. Hi, Carol. Hi, Diane. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I'm just flipping the page, and as I look up, I see who's commented. Now, the next morning, Esther said to her servants, I want you to go and tell Mordecai to get all the Jews together to fast and pray for me. Tell them to not eat or drink for 3 days. And I and my maidens too are going to fast and pray. And after the 3 days, when it's done, I will go to the king. Despite what that law says, that you must be invited, I will go to the king, and if I perish, then I perish. Queen Esther fasted for 3 days, and she prayed. And finally, she mustered up her courage, and she went to see the king. She leaned against the door outside of the throne room, and she sighed heavily. This was going to be harder than she even had imagined. She really wasn't even feeling very good. She hadn't eaten for 3 days from fasting. And she was so scared that the king was going to be upset, it made her stomach just hurt and burn, and she felt so bad. But finally, she pushed her dark hair out of her face, and she straightened her crown, and she stepped inside the throne room. And at that moment, the king turned around angrily. He hadn't invited anyone to come that morning. Why didn't people understand how hard it was to run the kingdom? How dare they interrupt him? Why, just as he raised his fist and began to yell, he looked up and saw Esther's beautiful face. How could he stay mad? He could see how scared she was. And why, she even looked paler than normal. A broad smile came across his face, and Esther was so relieved she hoped that he was going to forgive her for interrupting. What is your wish, Queen Esther? Whatever you want, you will get, even if it is half of my kingdom, said the king. Well, the time did not feel right to tell the king of her real reason. Haman's sons were in the throne room with the king, and she feared that if Haman knew her plans, why, he'd instigate an open revolt against the king. And then he would still follow through with his evil, awful plans. Esther swallowed quickly and said, "If it please the king, my lord, would you and Haman come to a banquet that I have prepared for you tonight?" This pleased the king to think that his queen missed him. Yes, it had been quite a while since he'd seen her, and here she was preparing a banquet just for him and Haman too, just so she'd have a good reason to see the king. What a sweet young thing. "Tell Haman to hurry and get ready so that he may do as Esther has requested," the king said to his aides. Later that evening, while the king and Haman were enjoying their banquet, Esther was walking nearby, watching, keeping an eye on what they were doing. And the king could see that Esther was still wanting to ask some sort of a favor of him. So once again he said, "My queen, what is it that you wish?" "I will give it to you, even if it means half of my kingdom." But still, Esther didn't feel the time was right. So she said, "Please come with Haman to another banquet that I shall prepare for you tomorrow, and then I will answer the king's question." Oh, Haman was so proud that he had been invited to both banquets. He and no one but the king. So he hurried home to tell his wife, "Why, even the queen recognizes my importance. Who can compare to me in power and wealth?" he scoffed. On his way home, he passed Mordecai again outside the gates. And not only did Mordecai refuse to bow, he didn't even stand up when Haman passed. Oh, this made Haman absolutely furious. He was raging and fuming by the time he got home to his wife. He complained bitterly about Mordecai. How dare he not show respect to Haman? "I must come up with a plan that has never been defeated before," Haman said. "Their God always saves them. Chopping off Mordecai's head won't work. Pharaoh tried that with Moses and his neck turned to stone." I'm going to turn that around this way and I'm going to work on this chair. I'm doing the gold on the outside of the chairs. "Drowning won't do any good. Their God will only open the Red Sea for them to walk through. Gouging out their eyes won't help. Look what that blind Samson has done to the Philistines. Burning him won't work either. Old King Nebuchadnezzar had tried that with Abednego, Meshach, and Shadrach, and they walked right out of that fiery furnace completely unharmed." A little bit too much gold. Now, personally, I'd love to feed Mordecai to the lions. But everyone knows that the Jewish prophet Daniel came out of that lion's den without even a scratch. So, I need you to think long and hard. I need you to come up with a plan that has never been prevented," Haman said to his wife. After a moment of silence, his wife exclaimed triumphantly, "Let's hang him! I know of no Jew who has been saved from the gallows. Let's build a gallows and watch him swing!" she cackled with glee. Haman was delighted, and he wasted no time. He decided that night to build the gallows. He built the gallows, and they were 75 feet high. And he planned to ask the king for permission the very next day. How in the world's that purple getting on there? I'm getting in the purple while I'm reading. Let me fix this. I got me a little bit of purple right here, and I'm just going to take my water and pick the purple up and drag it right back off of there. Go back into the red. Fix my spot. Rinse that off and go back to the gold and finish what I was doing. Okay, that old lady, he had made the gallows. They were 75 feet high, and he was going to ask the king for permission to hang Mordecai the very next day. And that way, he'd have the whole matter taken care of during the day, and he'd have the whole evening to enjoy the banquet that Queen Esther was preparing. He was so excited with his terrible, awful plans. No one slept that night. Mordecai and the rest of the Jewish people, they spent the whole night praying. Esther, she spent the whole night busily preparing for the banquet the next day for the king and Haman. Even Haman didn't sleep that night. He was too busy up building the gallows. Even the king was not given rest. He couldn't sleep. He ordered that the royal book of the Chronicles, which is the book of his reign that tells the stories of what had happened during his reign, all his wonderful things that he had done, he ordered that the book of Chronicles be brought to him and read to him, so that he might find some peace and fall asleep. And as the book was read to the king, he was reminded of the day that Mordecai had saved his life, for he had been the one to tell Queen Esther of the plot against him. And the king asked, well, what reward Mordecai had received for his good deed. The king's attendant told him that nothing had been done for Mordecai. Now, the next morning, as Haman went to see the king to ask permission to hang Mordecai, not knowing that Mordecai had once saved the king heard some whispering in the outer court, and he said, "Who's there?" "Haman is here," replied the servants. "Let him come in," said the king. And when the king saw Haman, he said, "What should be done to the man I wish to honor?" Haman was filled with pride. Mistakenly, he thought that the king was referring to him. He smiled and selfishly thought to himself, "Why, of course the king is talking about me. He wishes to honor me." I'm going to give her a little drop of green for the leaves. And we'll give her some green eyes, since we're getting the green out. Okay, so Haman thinks that the king is wanting to honor him. Ha ha! And he's so full of pride. So he answered, "Well, you should send the king's robe and a horse that the king has ridden, one with that royal crest upon its head, and one of your crowns. Send these to one of the king's most noble princes, and let him dress that man in your robes, place the crown upon his head, put him upon your horse, and lead him throughout the city, while proclaiming to all, 'See how this man is honored by the king. This is what is done for one whom the king delights in.'" King Ahasuerus smiled his broad, beaming smile, and he said, "I knew you'd have a good idea, Haman. Now hurry, take these robes of mine and go get my personal horse and my crown. Do as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew who sits at the king's gate. And do not fail to do one thing of all that you have said." Ho! Haman did his best to hide how mad and upset he was at the king's command, but it certainly was not easy. The very man that Haman wanted to hang was going to be honored. Haman obeyed the king, of course, but he didn't do it happily. He was very upset. His enemy was being honored and would be led around the city while it was being proclaimed, "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor." Haman reluctantly dressed Mordecai in the king's robes, put the crown upon his head, and he asked Mordecai to mount the horse. And Mordecai replied, I am weak after not eating for days. How do you expect me, an old man, to mount this horse all by myself?" Now Haman knew that the king's words were to be followed to the letter, and the king was probably becoming impatient, he thought. So without further ado, Haman bent down and allowed Mordecai to step upon his back to mount the royal horse. And Haman led him through the city on the king's personal horse while shouting the proclamation. Imagine. Okay, we've done that now. I wonder if I should do the tablecloth in a green. Or maybe do the floor in the green. No, that wouldn't look right. We'll do the tablecloth in the green. We'll do it in one of these, yeah. Let me get this one. Well, first we'll do this in the edging here. So there he was, having to bend down to allow Mordecai to climb up his back in order to mount the king's horse. You can just imagine how this just was killing Haman. But he knew he had to do it. Now the streets quickly filled with people. The royal heralds came out and they sounded their trumpets. And the highest officers came out and they escorted the procession. It was just a sight to behold. And above all, the sound could be heard of Haman, loud and clear, his voice proclaiming, "See how this man is honored by the king. This is what is done for one whom the king delights in." And seeing the procession from the roof of their home, Haman's wife and daughter watched the display down on the street below. But somehow they were confused. "Mother, look! There is father riding on the king's horse, and Mordecai is leading him," his daughter shouted. She grabbed the garbage can, and with an evil laugh, she threw it down on the man she thought was Mordecai. And then as the garbage fell all around the man leading the horse, she realized her mistake. She had dumped a whole can of trash on her own father. Dejected and disgraced, his clothes covered in trash and stinking, Haman drug himself home after the procession was over. Just a smidgen right there. Put that right off. He poured out the story of how the king should have honored him, but instead had honored Mordecai the Jew. At his very own suggestions, he cried bitterly to his wife and his children, but there was nothing that they could do to comfort him. Suddenly, right in the middle of Haman's rant, there appeared a few of the king's messengers to the door. "We are here to bring Haman at once to the banquet of the queen." Haman quickly changed his clothes and combed his hair and dared not let on to the way he was feeling. Haman met the king at the palace, and together they headed for the second banquet with Queen Esther. Now on the sides here of the tablecloth, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take just the tiniest bit of the black and add to this color green just to darken it up a little bit. Get it all over my thumb first. So there they are at the second banquet. A little touch of black. Mix it in my green. And I just want it to be just a little bit darker, not terribly, terribly darker. And then we can also just do a little dark there, a little dark here. I don't know if that's dark enough. Maybe that'll be better. That looks a little bit darker. Yes, because see, now it's over the side of the table, so of course it's going to have a different color to it. It's not the same color. It's hanging down the side of the table. It's going to be shaded. And there's also going to be a little bit of the shading that's going to go right under the table right there, or right under the platter, I mean, on the table. But we're going to give that a moment to dry first before we begin doing that. I've got the air conditioner on up here, and I know that that's noisy for you guys. I'm sorry. But it's awfully warm here in Cincinnati today. We're having some hot, sticky weather. But then again, it is the end of July, isn't it? Okay, now back to the story. Here we are. Haman had met the king at the palace, and together they headed for the second banquet with the Queen Esther. As the evening progressed, the king knew that Esther was waiting to tell him her request. But she had yet to do so. And finally, he said, "Surely there is some request you wish to make. You haven't arranged these two banquets just for the pleasure of Haman's company. What is it you want, my queen? What is your request?" "Whatever it is, I will give it to you, even if it's half of my kingdom," the king said. Esther stopped to think before she spoke. She thought to herself, well, that great honor that was bestowed upon Mordecai was surely a sign from God. She felt confident, but when she spoke, her voice was filled with emotion. If the king be pleased, I request that the king will save my life and the life of all the Jews. We are facing death very soon. All of my people and I are to be killed. Each and every one of us must die." Finally, Esther had shared the secret of her faith and proclaimed herself a Jew. She begged the king to spare her people. The king became very angry. "Who dare touch you or any of your relatives?" he demanded. A very wicked and mean and cruel man, a ruthless enemy who has already seen Queen Vashti to her doom and now would also take my life. "The villain is no other than Haman," she said, while she pointed straight at him. "Haman has tricked you, and he signed a new law that would get rid of all the Jews. Haman is wicked and is our enemy." Haman was so full of hate and envy that he had tried to destroy an entire population of people just to get back at one man, at Mordecai. Just to get back at one man. But now, Haman was as white as a ghost. "So it is you who dared plot against the queen in my own home," yelled the king. The king got up from his throne and he stormed out of the room and into the palace garden for some fresh air and to try to control his anger. And to the king's amazement, there were several people cutting down the rare and exotic trees in the royal garden. Now, really, they were not people at all. They were actually angels that had been disguised as humans and sent down to make the king even more angry at Haman. "Who ordered you to do this?" roared the king. "Haman," the gardener angels answered. As soon as the king had left the room, Haman had jumped up from his seat and he ran to Queen Esther and he was begging for his life. He knew the king was ready to have him put to death. He should never have had those evil plans. The king, he rushed back in and he saw Haman throwing himself upon the queen while begging for mercy. And this angered the king even more, and he shouted, and the servants ran and they held Haman back from the queen. Harbona, one of the king's attendants, told the king of the gallows that Haman had made. Why, the king could not believe his ears. This made him become even more furious, and he ordered that Haman be hung on those very gallows. And that is the way that Haman died. His pride and his cruelty had led to his own destruction. I'm going to add a little more black to it now and make it even darker green. And I'm just going to take that and put it right here. In this area, I even want it darker than that. Right in there. Right in here. Coming down over the edge. And we'll put just a little bit of shading underneath here. Let me get a little bit of that. Maybe a little under the glass. just as a shading. There we go. So now you see how that looks there along the table. Okay, so now it's time to, let's see, what can we do? Still need to color her skin in and color her hair. So I'm just going to get a little bit of peach out here, using all kinds of colors. Now Haman's cruelty and his pride had led to his own destruction. His jealousy had cost him his life. He was hung on the very gallows that he had built for Mordecai. Oh, come on, paint. I know I don't need much of that. He was hung on the very gallows that he had built for Mordecai. Now, King Ahasuerus, he had every reason to be proud of his queen. Not only was she beautiful and caring and kind and gracious, he learned that she was the descendant of the royal family of Saul, and Saul was the first king of the Jews. And then he heard that Mordecai was a descendant of the same noble family and was in fact Queen Esther's cousin. He hadn't known that. So he immediately appointed Mordecai to succeed Haman as prime minister. Now, Mordecai was dressed in magnificent robes, and he served the king and his people with humility and great devotion. I'm painting her little toes. With humility and great devotion, the news of the great salvation of the Jews spread like wildfire to the most remote corners of the kingdom. And now all of the Jewish people were treated with respect and dignity. Peace was restored to the kingdom, and God had used Queen Esther to keep her people safe. All because the young queen had mustered up her courage and was willing to go before the king, even if it meant her own death. The brave young queen had saved her people. Esther is an early example of an empowered woman. Esther showed courage, grace, humility. She used her position as queen for only one thing: to save her people. Wisdom is humble, and that is exactly how Esther lived her life. She relied on prayer and fasting. She learned to lean on to God and not rely on her own wisdom. She feared God and not man. She wasn't worried about that. She feared God. What exactly does it mean to be humble or to have humility? Well, if I had a recipe card, one of the main ingredients of humbleness is to value others and to help them be heard. Spend time with others. Listen to them. Try to draw out their feelings and their values. Help them express themselves. This is a very powerful way to learn exactly who they are, what they're good at, and what they might need some help with. Remember, it's not always about you. You have to care for others. And if there was more on that recipe card, you would also find some of these other ingredients. Acknowledging that you may not have it together all of the time. pretty hard to have it together all of the time. Knowing the difference between being self-confident and being just plain prideful. Wanting to add value to other people's lives. And taking responsibility for your own actions. Being filled with gratefulness for the blessings that you have. And honesty might be the key sign that you possess humility. Now, how does that help me? Why is that important to God? In Proverbs 11, it says, "Pride leads to disgrace, but humility comes with wisdom." Being prideful closes you off. It keeps you from being able to be transformed into what the Lord is trying to do for you, what the Lord is trying to do. You need to prepare your heart for God's wisdom. It is acknowledging our dependence on God, and without God, acknowledging that we are nothing. Humility allows us to fully submit to God. God wants us to acknowledge that apart from Him, we can't do anything. He created us. He knows us better than our own parents. He has a plan for each and every one of us. And when we put our faith in God, we humble ourselves and depend on God. The lesson on women of the Old Testament studies faith, goodness, devotion, and the courage of Esther. Why was she an important person in history? Because of her courage and her devotion to God. God was able to use her to save the Jews. Once again, this is just another story that shows us that God has a plan for our life. He's always working for our good. It's also important for girls and women to know that they can be brave too. There's so many examples of brave men and heroes in the Bible. It is nice to have a few biblical persons for girls to identify with. Now, this story, if you enjoyed it, can be found in the greatest book ever written. It's in the Bible. It's in the Old Testament. It's in the book of Esther. Chapters 2 to 8. And from what I read, I believe Mordecai is responsible for the writing of that chapter. Isn't that interesting? I do hope that you guys have enjoyed Vacation Bible School this year. You know, if you have and you would like to see more of it, please let me know. This is the last and final episode for this year. We had the 4. Last year we had 6. I completely intend on coming again next year and doing more Vacation Bible School. I'm just going to put some lighter gray highlights through there, even though she's not got gray hair. I'm just trying to show that she's got some waves in her hair. Just a little bit. Just to give it a little bit of highlights. There we go. That looks pretty good. The only thing left to do now is to paint the background and the floor, and I still really haven't decided what color to do that. What color do you guys think I should paint that? I hate to get another color out, But without using another color, all I'm going to be doing is making it not stand out as much. Let's make it. Where is that light blue? Here we go. You know me. I like blue. How about some blue? Ten colors on this painting. That's okay. That's okay. I don't mind. Use this one first. I'm almost done with it, guys. Thank you for sticking in here with me. Add just a little bit of water to it. Okay, get that out of here. Don't want to get it too thin, but I don't want it to be thick either, because I want it to go on pretty quick and pretty easy. And usually I do not recommend trying to do the background like this last. But I just couldn't decide on the colors. So I kept putting it off, and now here it is, the last thing that I'm doing. That's okay. It's all okay. It's gonna look nice when it's finished. Just a little bit here. I've gotten quiet. I'm trying to concentrate on putting it in between the little areas here by holding this brush up on its edge. And I'm just using this tippy little corner is what I'm using right now to paint with. Is the tiniest little corner on that paintbrush is what I'm using to go around this area, just to put in that light blue and right in here in between her hands. Laying it a little bit flatter here, back to the corner. Right in between. Just filling it in real quick. Who's painting with me tonight? Anybody? Anybody actually filling in their painting, or is everybody just watching? Either way, I don't mind. I hope you enjoyed the story. That's really the purpose of it. I did want you to have an opportunity to craft along with me, but if you're just listening, hey, I'm just happy to have you here with me. I appreciate you being here so much. I've really enjoyed this year. I truly have. I've really enjoyed doing the Vacation Bible School this year. It's been a lot of fun. The stories have been so much fun. And I think it really made a difference of putting the picture up and allowing others to paint along with me as opposed to how it was done last year. You guys got any suggestions for next year? Please let me know what you would like to see, what you would like me to do. I am really, really interested and very curious. I'd love to collaborate and come up with some great ideas on what you'd like to have. Now when I get done with this, I'll take my marker, my Sharpie marker, and I will just go back over all of the outlines so that it'll have a nice crisp outline to everything. Just gonna fill this right here. Use my little corner right around through here. And see, with it being light blue, you can get it in other spots and it doesn't really mess it up as much because you can just quickly take your finger and kind of pick it up. Yeah, getting that a little bit of a different look to it by dragging it sideways as it's just about to dry. Kind of make the floor have a sort of a shiny look to it. It is the castle floor, by the way, you know. Just gonna fill this real quick around the glass. Right in that tiny spot. Yeah. After I had made it, it was like, why did I put a turkey on there? I don't think they had turkeys. So I got to thinking about it, and we looked it up. There's goats and lambs were mainly what they ate during that time frame. So I made it just some sliced meat on the platter, trying to hope that that would maybe just look a little more sensible than the turkey. But if you have the turkey one, that's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Who's to say what they did or didn't have? I did read an article that said that, you know, they had found chicken bones in a place from, I think it was 200 to 600 BC. And as we know, chickens and dinosaurs are very closely related also. So, you know, maybe they did have a chicken or a turkey or something back then that they ate. Who's to say? Who's to say? We can make it anything we want it, can't we? It's all okay. It's just a drawing with a story that was meant for fun and a little bit of education too. A little bit of learning, but a little bit of fun. Tilt this way. And I'm just sort of scrubbing that, actually taking it and kind of turning it and holding it and just pressing it in. Alright guys, there we go. She's all painted. I think she turned out pretty cute. I like it. I hope you enjoyed this. I appreciate you joining me for Vacation Bible School. I hope you'll join me again next year, and I also hope that you'll go and watch the other videos if you haven't seen them. Appreciate you being here. Thanks so much. I'll see you. Oh, let's see. Oh, you don't need artistic abilities, believe you me. You don't have to draw anything. All you have to do is just color. Diane, all you need is some crayons, girl. Go wild. Hey, Carol. Oh, you're going to paint later? Make a list of the colors? Yes. Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Oh, thank you. All right, guys. I'm going to see you later. I'll see you. Bye.